I was really struck with your piece Reflections, and they asked me to interview a composer or two, and so I chose you for this. So let's start with an obvious question. As far as I can tell, this is your first guitar piece. Is that true?
It is. It is my very first.
Okay, then. So, one thing that struck me is that, you are in an R&B neo soul band, and your bio says, I'm just quoting here, Neighbors' music draws from combinations of jazz, funk, R&B, and gospel with the modern flair of contemporary classical music. So you've picked the most crossover of all instruments, but you kind of wrote a standard modern classical guitar piece. I don't hear a lot of the that other stuff in there. So maybe you could speak to that for a sec.
Yeah, definitely. I would say that you mostly get those references from more of the popular American styles through just the harmonies specifically, and maybe some of the rhythmic sort of undulations throughout the piece, but nothing really directly quoted that would say, oh, this is gospel. But really just a mix. I guess there is a little bit of bending, towards the contemporary classical side, but definitely that influence harmonically and definitely sort of a visceral rhythmic leaning is definitely throughout.
Right. In fact, actually, the tapping, some of the rhythmic stuff, the tapping specifically is like Stanley Jordan or steel string players. So it's like the effects of more pop styles, but the material is not so much there. So
Yeah,
that's kind
yeah.
of interesting to me. Yeah. So I'm wondering if you studied specific classical guitar pieces in preparing, and I asked that because there's a moment, actually, the first measure of the theme reminds me of a couple of measures in Michael Tippett's piece called The Blue Guitar. And
Hmm.
the beginning of the first variation is like the first variation of a set of variations that Lennox Berkeley wrote for guitar. So I'm just wondering what sources you used or how you studied the guitar.
Definitely. I definitely went to a lot of contemporary pieces that were just sitting there on YouTube, whether with score or without. There was some Takamitsu pieces. There was
Wonderful
some
pieces.
other wonderful living composers that I've since forgotten what I looked at now. But that's really interesting that you were able to pick up on, some other composers. I hadn't heard of those pieces before, but I would love to check them out.
Yeah, I mean, it's coincidental, but I did have that memory. And did you run across the Hennestera Sonata? Because there's a lot of sort of tapping and percussion in that.
Oh my gosh, I didn't even know he wrote one. He's actually
Oh,
one of my favorite composers.
yeah.
I
He
have
wrote
to hear
one
it now.
later in his life, and it's similar in form and style to the Piano Sonata,
Mhm.
which I'm sure you know. But
Yeah, yeah.
that's worth checking out. Yeah. So let's talk about the theme for a second. It's a really interesting theme to me. It's not a melody, or it doesn't feel like, okay, here's a melody that I want to sing.
Hmm.
And that reminds me a little bit of, the most renowned guitarist composer in the world, who's Leo Brouwer, a Cuban composer, who says melodies don't work on the guitar. I just want to write, motives and develop those. And I was thinking about your theme. I mean, it's a little bit of everything. It's a lot of verticality and harmony. It's in five. It's kind of a melody, but it's ornamented such that it doesn't read so much as a melody. And so I'm thinking that you just wanted to throw a lot in there, but maybe you can talk about how you came up with the theme itself.
Definitely. A lot of my melodies, I guess more so in my orchestral music, there is a true sense of melody immediately that you can carry without you. Well, with you throughout the piece. But for this piece, I guess it goes back to just me being a pianist. And a lot of times I'll just try to get these sort of contrapuntal leanings of just these broken chords that your ear will follow sort of a melodic line, but as you said, not a true melody that just sticks with you throughout. But I wanted to kind of embed almost in a way that a chaconne might do, or even like a passacaglia, but in which the basic kind of form and harmonic sort of progression throughout that you can follow throughout each variation, but it's not something so in your face, almost like I guess the piece almost feels more so through compose rather than a theme and variations. But I really just wanted to get the freedom of just I don't know, just almost like a soundscape that you could just kind of lean back and relax into, but still have a little bit of something to follow along with. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, you did. It's all interesting. So it sounds like you may have written it on the piano. Was there a guitar around when you were writing it?
Yeah, I actually wrote the entire thing on the guitar. I have an acoustic guitar, but it's steel string, which explains a lot of the sliding stuff I had in the beginning. I didn't even think about this, but of course, when you're writing for classical guitar, most people have nylon. And then as soon as I sent the piece off, I was like, oh, well, let me just see if you can still hear the
Yeah,
the
yeah,
sliding. Yeah,
right. And that's the part you took out, the one that the
yeah,
sliding. Okay,
yeah.
yeah, I understand. Yeah, it was interesting to see the first and second versions, and that actually leads to my next question, which is in Variation 3. I've seen the most recent edit, which you sent me this morning, and the previous one brought to mind a quote that I read in your piece Zephyr from your program note, where you say, "As always, I find it most fun to juxtapose the romantic with the barbarous." So in Variation 3, you have this bisbigliano, this kind of rubbing of the strings going on, and in the first version, you had these sforzandi Bartok pizzas underneath it, and then you kind of modified those in the edited one, where they're kind of in the same mode. And
Mhm.
I wondered how that transformation took place.
Definitely. In my talks, just with Evan working on the performance of it, he showed me kind of two different ways of looking at it. And I really like the quieter version that he presented because it was such a contrast in sound. We didn't want really that huge Bartok picks to ring throughout when he wanted to come back in with the rubbing. So I'm like, ooh, maybe a quieter or a set of quieter iterations of those low voices coming in after each iteration of the quick soul punt sort of tremolo on all the other bigger chords in that section. I thought was much more effective because it really kind of drew you in to what was going on. I really like the way that turned out rather than just a boing every
Yeah.
every 2 or 3 seconds.
Yeah. I mean, I never heard it that way, but looking at the score, I was thinking of that quote. But
Mm-hmm,
it's the I think I get. I mean, I get that the fact that it's a really short variation, and
mm-hmm,
it just sets you in one mood, and it just gets out of it right away. Yeah.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And then we get into the kind of the tapping, and is that something you just figured out, kind of playing around on your guitar?
I did. I was messing around. Like I want some sort of rhythmic contrast between the bigger chords of that section. So I was like, oh, this seems like a really cool thing to try. And originally, it had some other stuff with it that I took out, as I mentioned before. But I just thought that was a really nice, interesting contrast to just, the traditional kind of hammered on chords
Yeah.
that happen throughout.
No, I think that that's really effective. And honestly, studying the score, it surprised me that someone would come up with all of that on a first go at the guitar.
I appreciate it.
The great British guitarist Julian Bream, he said, "You always want to get the second piece from every composer, not the first one." Because they're learning, they're learning what they're doing. But I think you've been really successful in this first piece. It's really,
Appreciate it.
I think, a tightly constructed and good set of variations here. Um, Anything else you want us to know about the piece? I mean, I was going to ask you about the ending a little bit, but maybe you have some thoughts you want people to know.
Hmm. Uh, Not really, other
Okay.
than to listen with open ears. But I think the video really helps to capture a lot of the extra effects
Yeah.
of the guitar. Yeah, I've really tried to go in and craft a really solid set of variations that would not change the guitar repertoire completely, but have a nice addition um, to what's out there.
Yeah. I don't think we need to shoot too large, but I think if you just write a really solid, well constructed piece, which you have here, that's a real contribution, you
I
know.
appreciate it.
So I hope you are you inspired to write more guitar music?
Definitely. I actually had a friend of mine reach out after I posted a few things on Instagram, and he was like, "Oh, I would love a guitar sonata from you." And so I think it was around the time I was actually composing that piece. I don't know if he knew about this particular commission, but I'm definitely thinking of going back as I have time and getting that guitar sonata out. And maybe I might include some of these other effects within it just to, add some more. Maybe I might try to come up with other things. It really helps to have some type of guitar laying around. I have all sorts of instruments in my room. I have a little cheap violin just hanging over there, and then I have another instrument that I love to just, pick up and just try different things on and say, well, let me see how possible this is. And anything I can't answer myself, I usually call one of my friends up and they're always happy to help me.
Yeah, and the guitar is so idiosyncratic that it really helps to, first of all, have even a guitar, even if you're playing in a rudimentary way,
Yeah.
and to check with a guitar player that where you can, not only need to reduce some things, but also expand the possibilities can happen. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah. And so I think that's really helpful. Well, I hope you write more. The general course that I recommend to composers is to start with chamber music and to include the guitar, sort of safety in numbers. You just put it with a mixed ensemble, and then graduate to solo, and then only after that attempt something like a concerto.
Hmm.
But you've dived in here, I think, really successfully, and I hope you do more.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yeah, and don't worry about being barbarous on the guitar. That can happen too.
Oh, yeah, I love
Yeah.
that.
All
Yeah,
right,
the
Brian.
dirtier
Thank
the
you so
better.
much.
Oh, thank you.
All right.